Welcome to Prism Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 3 of ASP.NET MVC tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss about creating an ASP.NET MVC application and understand how MVC request is processed as opposed to a web form request. First, let's go ahead and create an MVC project. So let's flip to Visual Studio, click on File, New Project, and I'm going to create an ASP.NET MVC4 web application, and let's call this MVCDemo. Click OK, and let's select an empty template. And then look at the ViewEngine drop-down list. I get two options here, meaning we have two built-in view engines, ASPX and Razor. Which one do we use? I personally prefer Razor ViewEngine because it has got much cleaner code. We'll talk about the differences between Razor and ASPX views in a later video session when we discuss about views. For now, let me select Razor as the view engine and click OK. So that should create an MVC project for us. Now let's flip to another instance of Visual Studio that's running on my machine, and let's create a web forms application. So click on File, New Project, and then this time I'm going to create an ASP.NET web forms application. So I'm going to select ASP.NET web application, and let's call this web forms demo. Alright, let's click OK. That should create a web forms application. Now we have MVC demo here, the MVC project, and notice the Solution Explorer. Within the Solution Explorer, we have models, views, and controllers. These folders, as the names suggest, they're going to contain models, views, and controllers of our MVC application. We'll discuss about models and views in detail in a later video session. Now let's go ahead and add a controller to our MVC project, and to do that, right click on the controller folder, add controller, and then give your controller a meaningful name. I'm going to call this home controller. Click add, and that should add a file with name homecontroller.cs to the controllers folder. Okay, and this is nothing but a class file, so it has got this class with the name home controller. And notice this class actually inherits from the base controller class. Okay, so what is a controller? It's nothing but a class which inherits from base controller class, and classes can contain functions. So this controller class has got one function at the moment, which is index. And look at the return type. It's returning something called action result. We'll discuss about this return type action result in a later video session. For now, let's make this index function return string instead of action result. And what string do I want to return? I want to return a message from this MVC application function saying hello from MVC application. So that's the string I want to return. So this function, very straightforward. All it's doing is returning a string. So at the moment, if you look at this controller, it's simple. It's a class, and it has got one function called index, which is going to return the string. Okay, now at this point, if I go ahead and run this, by default it's going to use built-in ASP.NET Development Server. Look at this, it's using the Visual Studio built-in ASP.NET Development Server. But let's deploy this to IIS, and deploying this to IIS is very simple. First, let's open IIS, and to do that, click on Start, type Run, and then press Enter. That should open Run window. Within Run window, type iNet Manager and hit OK. That should open IIS. Okay, now at the moment, if I expand the virtual directories, the websites that are there in this IIS, look at this. At the moment, I don't have MVC demo, so let's deploy this project MVC demo to IIS. And to do that, right click on the project, go to properties, and then on the web tab, look at this. At the moment, we are using Visual Studio Development Server, but instead of that, I want to use a local IIS web server. So that's the radio button that I'm going to select, and then click on this button, Create Virtual Directory. So the virtual directory was successfully created. So now if we go back to IIS, we should have MVC demo created there. Okay, so now let me go ahead and run this MVC project. Let's save that. And then if we run this now, it should be using the local IIS. look at here, it's using a random port number, meaning it's using the Visual Studio built-in development server, but here it's not using the port number. Look at this, localhost is nothing but the name of the server. It's running on my machine, and MVCDemo is the name of the project. Okay, now let's go ahead. Now let's say I want to print this message in a web forms application. How do I do that? It's pretty straightforward. In a web form, you add a web form, and in the load event of that web form, you include a response.write and then give it this message. It's just going to write that message onto the web form. So let's do that quickly, and then we'll differentiate between web forms and MVC, the request processing. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this about and default web forms, and then I'm going to add a web form with name webform1.aspx. So add new item, let's call it webform1.aspx, and then let's get to the code behind file. So within the code behind file, I'm going to say response.write hello from web forms application. Okay, so let's go ahead and deploy this also to IIS, and to do that, simply right click on the project, it's the same process, and go to the web tab, and then select use local IIS web server. By default, we get a default directory which is the name of the project, webformsdemo. You can change it if you want to, and then click on create virtual directory. That should create a virtual directory with an IIS for that. So let's go ahead and run this now. As you might expect, this web forms application should use local IIS instead of the built-in web server. And then look at this, actually it's still using the local IIS for some reason. Let's see if that is saved properly. So let's refresh this. So we should have web forms demo there, and let's actually save it. It didn't save that. I still see that star symbol there. That's why it's not saved. So let's save it. Let's run it now, and at this point it should use local IIS instead of the built-in Visual Studio built-in ASP.NET development server. Okay, now let's understand how these requests are handled the ASP.NET Web Forms request as opposed to an MVC request. So obviously, if you look at the MVC application, notice the URL here. It says localhost MVC demo. That's it. Now what I'm going to do here is, and look at the output, we get that message hello from MVC application. Now I'm going to say in the URL, so localhost is the name of the server, MVC demo is the project name, and then home / I'm going to say index, and then press enter. Look at that, I get the same output. So this is the URL, localhost MVCDemo home / index, and look at the web forms URL, localhost webformsdemo webform1.aspx. Okay, so we are used to web forms development. So if you look at this URL, this is straightforward. Localhost is the server name, webformsdemo is the project name, and webform1.aspx, that's the name of the file. So this URL actually invokes a file with name webform1.aspx. So within my web forms application, we have got that webform1.aspx. So when the request for this web form is received at the web server, obviously all the events of this web form will be processed, including the page load event, at which point it's going to generate this message, generate the HTML, and send it back to the requested client. So basically, within web forms application, the URLs are mapped to the physical files. Okay, here webform1.aspx is a physical file that exists within our ASP.NET Web Forms application. Whereas in an MVC application, the URLs are mapped to controllers and controller action methods. Okay, so basically if you look at the MVC URL, it's localhost, that's the name of the server, and MVCDemo is the project as usual. So there's no difference between those two parts in a MVC and web forms. But then after that, after the project name, you have this home. So this is nothing but the controller. So it actually searches MVC controllers folder by default. Is there a controller with the name home? And we do have it. Okay, and then after that, it's the function within that controller. Okay, so home controller and index function. So invoke, this URL is going to invoke index function that resides in home controller. And obviously we know all the controllers within an MVC application are present in controllers folder by default. Okay, so in MVC, URLs are mapped to controller action methods. So usually functions inside a controller that can respond to URLs are called as controller action methods. Okay, but whereas in a web forms, URLs are mapped to physical files. Okay, so in my MVC project, if you look at this, I have a home controller, and within that I have index function. So I get this message back. Now let's say instead of index function, I'm saying something like get details, for example, and then press enter. What will happen? The resource cannot be found. Why is that? Within home controller, I don't have a function called get details. That's why I get a 404 HTTP status code 404, meaning the resource cannot be found. So if I go ahead and add get details function to our controller within this home control, a function to this home controller class, then it should work. So let me actually copy this and paste it here, and let's call it get details. So that's the name of the function. So get details. Okay, let's save it and let's call it get details invoked. Okay, so now let's actually run this once again. So I get that localhost MVCDemo. When the web form loads, look at that, by default the index function is called. So I'm going to go to the home controller, and then I'm going to go to get details function. Okay, look at that, we get that message get details invoked. Now instead of the home controller, if I say, let's say home1 and then press enter, so obviously within the controllers folder we don't have a controller with name home1. That's why again we get this message, the resource cannot be found. So the important thing to understand is that in MVC, the URLs are mapped to controller action methods, whereas in web forms, URLs are mapped to physical files. We'll discuss about controllers, models, and views in detail in a later video session. On this slide, you can find resources for ASP.NET, C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.